Kelly Iko is joining us in person, in the flesh, covers the Houston Rockets for The Athletic. Ime Udoka is the new head coach for the Houston Rockets. Kelly, take us through the process, the coaching search. I think the Rockets did a tremendous job and got one of the top candidates on the market.
So I think for like a 2-week process, they kind of had their candidates in mind. Obviously, the top guys were going to be like Udoka, Frank Vogel, Nick Nurse, if he ever became available. But as the process went on, obviously guys like Frank and Ime stood out. And at the time, Nick Nurse was still under contract with Toronto because they were still in the playoffs. But after he got fired, at that point, the Rockets already kind of knew that Ime was going to be their guy. It was just a matter of crossing T's and dotting I's. And so those next few days became about, okay, how can those guys get this over the line and get Ime in the door? Because they kind of understood what he brought to the table in terms of bringing structure, bringing accountability to those guys, bringing culture. Someone that can get the respect of star players and veterans and young players, and who demands accountability on both ends of the floor, and who's going to be someone that you can actually lead through a rebuild.
I got 2 questions for you then. One, how much did Toronto and Nurse parting ways, and the fact that Ime had a relationship with Masai to where there was a rumor that could have sped up the process? And do you think this was a Tillman hire or a Stone hire?
I think it's a Tillman hire for sure. Tillman,
I did too.
I think he's a big fan of Ime and what he brings from a coaching standpoint, from a locker room standpoint. In terms of the second question, I do think that Ime had his choices, but he was attracted to the Rockets' flexibility and the potential of what they can bring in the draft and free agency and kind of what they can put around that young core. I think that's kind of also, Texas money, income tax,
real estate, and the whole works. Yeah,
a lot of those things play into part, but at the end of the day, he was sold on the project in Houston and what they're trying to build.
I think it's great for the Rockets fans to be, top candidate in this coaching carousel says, I want him. I want to be the head coach of that team. What are they getting? What are the Rockets getting with Ime Udoka? Obviously, we know a lot of the fans. They know that he went to the finals with Boston in his only year as a head coach, a former Popovich disciple. What are the Rockets getting with Ime Udoka?
They're going to get somebody who is going to preach defense first. He's going to demand respect on the floor. He's going to demand structure and organization. You're not going to get away with the heavy ISO and taking bad shots here and not getting back in transition
Jalen
defense.
Green, Kevin Porter Jr.
Getting guys in shape. He's going to demand that peak physical, shape and that peak, from an emotional standpoint, you have to be team first. He's going to demand those guys that get on the same page, extra passes, accountability, sharing the ball, taking good shots, passing up good shots for great shots. That's the kind of guy that they're getting in Ime, and somebody who is going to stress defense, because you see what he did with the Celtics in the second half of the season, bringing them within 2 wins of an NBA Finals. That was off the back of the number 1 defense in the league. And if you're able to take a team in Houston where for 3 years they kind of didn't give a crap about defense, and hopefully you can get those guys to build those good habits, getting guys like Tari Eason, Jabari Smith Jr., Jayshawn Tate, those guys that can buy in and set the culture for everyone else. Now you have a plan to build off.
I want to get back to this Tillman thing because I think that Tillman heard the rumblings from all the national guys and the local guys about this was a bleep show. Like the culture and everything was completely running amok. And I think that Tillman saw a guy that was able to come in and change culture no matter how big the egos were. We know Jaylen Brown and we know Jason Tatum have big egos. We know Marcus Smart has a big ego. And he was able to be the loudest voice in the room and get control of what other people might have seen as another uncontrollable situation and take that team to the finals. That's why I think Tillman said, because I also believe, and credit to you for coming out with the article with Shams, that was all about exposing Stone for what he has done and who he has been that people didn't want to believe and didn't think was happening. That puts an end to all this if you're Tillman. That is a hire that I don't think Stone makes because Stone liked how much power he had. I think Tillman doing this says, I'm resetting the reputation. I'm bringing in a guy that gets control of my team, and I'm getting a guy that's going to coach up and make my team the best it can be. And I think that as an owner, you need to do something like that.
Yeah, so, before this process started, I don't think those guys knew Ime all that well. Obviously about his coaching acumen and stuff like that, but it took for him coming to Houston, getting to meet with Rafael, getting to meet with Eli and all those guys in the front office, and then getting to meet with Tillman, and Tillman just falling in love with him and saying, this is the guy that I think should be the next guy to lead this group forward. And it was a collective process. But the fact that Tillman was so aggressive in this pursuit, it kind of shows you what he's trying to do, I guess, for these next 3 or 4 years going down the line.
Kelly Eco joining us in studio to talk about the Ime Udoka hire, hired by the Houston Rockets yesterday. We were talking about this earlier in the show, Kelly, and a lot of our texters were saying, well, when can the Rockets get back into playoff contention? When can we take them seriously in that regard again? Of course, a lot depends on the May 16th NBA draft lotto, but what is a realistic plan for this team to be back to being in playoff contention?
Well, if you want to start with playing, I would say, if they can nail this summer, I think maybe not this coming season, but I could see maybe a next season after this. If they get things right, you got to reset the whole culture. You got to actually get defense first. You got to get guys that want to give a care about winning. If that happens, and I think Ime is the guy to do that, I could see them 2024 potentially getting to play in maybe 38 wins, 40 wins. It's not crazy, because if you add 3 or 4 vets to this team that know how to win and can bring everyone else up by their bootstraps, now you have a program that wants to actually do things, move forward, and kind of get out of these doldrums that they've been in for so long.
Credit to you and Shams again, because of the fact that you not only had the initial story, but you were the first to get on this with Udoka. You talk about, if everything goes as planned. Part of that's the draft. Right. And obviously the ping pong balls.
Right.
But that's something you can't control. You can control free agency. We've heard Harden's name. We've heard other veterans. We've heard how this team sorely needs a few veterans for the locker room and what they bring to the table. You've been on that too as well, on the Harden train, and talking about the possibilities. What are the realistic possibilities for James Harden? And then what others might we consider as veterans that can come in when they have money to kind of make this thing go along faster?
So obviously you need wings. A guy like Cam Johnson, although he's restricted, there is real interest there on both sides. I think it's kind of hard because the Nets know how valuable he is, and other teams around the league know how valuable he is.
Plus, he was a piece in the Durant puzzle they don't want to lose.
Right. So that could also make things kind of tricky, but he is one of those guys to watch. I know you guys don't want to hear it, but Dylan Brooks, he talks a lot, but as far as a defensive,
he brings an attitude.
Yeah, he brings an edge, kind of like a bigger Pat Beverly.
He doesn't talk to the media after games, though.
On the next day, he does.
But guys like that, guys like Brook Lopez, some rim protection, and you do need some shooters. And obviously, if you want to go,
but how realistic is Harden?
I mean, it's realistic because there's interest there, but a lot of things have to happen to get to that point. It sounds good on paper, but
Jeremy really wants him. I just want to let you know.
I mean, he's one of the best playmakers there is around right now, and if he can take that step back that he couldn't take back in Houston, that we're seeing now. Now, granted, it's easy.
A big if.
It's easy to do that. If you have an Embiid on your team, but
when you were the king in this city and this franchise, it's hard to come back as the prince.
That's true. That's very true. But people change. You never know.
Okay. Can Jaylen Brown be a real thing?
I think so, because if you go back to when Ime was hired, one of the biggest proponents of that hire was Jaylen Brown. So I do know the Rockets are going to be aggressive.
Well, you bring up a great point, because that's a connection.
In terms of the Rockets are going to be aggressive in terms of upgrading this team. Now, Jalen's not a free agent, but if there are any rumblings of potential unhappiness in Boston or whatever have you, and
if they don't win it all, I think there's
Supermax and
with
stuff
him
like that
coming up in a year, I think this offseason is the time that they will part ways and separate Tatum and Brown. But then the question becomes, at what price? How much do you have to give up to get it?
That's the thing, because the money. But I do think getting Ime is that critical first step to anything, because there are players around the league that text and calling like, this is a real thing. I got some like last night, like, this is a real legitimate hire, and people see that. And players, veterans,
does this change the culture? Sorry, Jeremy. Does this change the culture and reputation?
I think it's a big start. I think it still needs accountability on both sides. So you still need a buy-in from the players. But from what I heard last night, the young players already want this. Like, this was the guy they wanted as well. So I think if you already have agreement and that alignment that was so key in the old days of D'Antoni and them, I think you can start to kind of see how these guys can climb out of this rebuild and get back to winning ways.
Give me a name that's a current player on this team that's going to benefit from Udoka, and a name that's going to go the other way now that can't handle the structure, can't handle the discipline.
Name that was going to benefit, I want to say Jalen Green.
Mm-hmm.
If you look at guys like a Tatum and a Brown who Udoka, they were obviously quality playmakers, but he allowed them to grow within themselves and become better leaders, better men, better playmakers on the floor. I think Jalen needs that structure. He actually wants to be held accountable. Part of his little exit interview was he wants to be pushed, he wants to be challenged. And Ime is going to do just that. Now, it's going to need – I do think that if Jalen and Kevin can fall in line, everyone else can as well.
No, you didn't answer the second part of the question.
Second part, who's going to be challenged?
No.
Who's going to balk at it, though?
I can answer it for you, but I just want to hear your point of view.
I think someone like Scoot maybe.
That would be KPJ, kid.
Scoot, maybe Şengün too a little bit in terms of the conditioning, just like that defensive buy-in.
Sure.
He needs guys that are going to want to actually, really give your all on both ends of the floor. And at times, the effort wasn't there for those guys. But
the days of KPJ getting away with everything are over.
It's going to come to a head.
I'll say it,
one way or the other.
You know it. It's over.